Welcome everyone to today's session of Gems from the Wisdom Tradition, a conversation circle, where today we have David Sanders sharing with us from the yogic tradition of Hinduism. And he's going to be speaking with us on one-pointed focus. Thank you, David. David is someone that I have known for the last 9 years. As soon as I saw David walking into my NIA class, I turned to him and said, "Oh, you must be a yogi." There was just something about the way he comported himself, something about the way he carried himself so mindfully that I knew what he did, and I was right. And it's been a joy for all of these years to be, I would say, truth seekers together. And so it's a great pleasure of mine to introduce David and ask him to give us our opening to this day's session.
Thank you, Renee. And let me just begin with a recognition of my appreciation for the opportunity to do this. I teach a lot of classes. It's very different being very physical and here just to be speaking on a topic that is so vast and sometimes confounding. It's quite a challenge. And I love the idea of being challenged to the point that can bring us to a state of focus that allows us to do what we do best. I may refer to this later in terms of being able to drop into a zone. Great that you selected this topic for me, Renee, because I am in life quite the dabbler. I tend to dive into many different areas and have a less focus on something. So there's a lot of breadth to my life experience and not necessarily a lot of depth. But one area that I've dove pretty deeply into is my lifelong practice of yoga. So 47 plus years of practicing yoga and close to 20 years of teaching it. And I would say one of the most challenging things for me is when somebody asks, what is yoga? So this notion of focus, which is the focus for today's presentation, is one of the important aspects of the yogic practice. So you mentioned Hinduism, and Hinduism and yoga seem to travel along parallel lines. They seem to have developed out of the same region, the Hindu-Sarasvati area of India. But whereas Hindu is a religion and a devotion and a set of beliefs, yoga is itself maybe just more of a practice, you might say. It's a path of enlightenment. So with that in mind, who I am, I would like to bring this into a little more of an experience. So rather than just intellectualizing on focus, I'd like to bring us in and offer us up a little meditation that will have two purposes. The first is to bring us present, fully present and focused here and now. And then the second is it's a little bit of a self-check. Where are we in terms of our relationship with this notion of focus? How well do we focus? So let's begin by finding a comfortable seat. This would be also a good time to take care of any external distractions that might arise. The object here is to focus. So distractions are the opposite of focus. We'll start with that. In the Yoga Sutras we'll talk about later, they mention the posture. So we're taking a seat and making your body as comfortable as you can so the body doesn't distract you. And much of the asana practice, what in modern terms we call yoga, is a series of postures that are designed to open the body up and make it comfortable to take this posture right here. Whatever your favorite seat is, find that now. And then simply close your eyes. And simply notice what's present in your experience. Continuing now to refine the physical posture, you can do some things like pull the flesh from under your sits bones, align your spine in its natural curves. Having the ears over the shoulders is probably a good way to get the upper spine aligned, as though there were a plumb line going down through the crown of your head, through your heart, down through your sits bones. So get comfortable. And in that comfort, then, we can narrow our focus down into a deeper layer, the breath layer. And notice your breath. Let it be easy, but let it be full. Invite a full breath in a comfortable way. And having eliminated the distractions of your posture, being able to focus in on your breathing, just notice what aspect of your breathing has most of your attention. For some, it's the feeling of the air passing across the nostrils or maybe the upper lip. And you might notice that the air coming in through your nose is a little cooler than the air coming out. After the breath comes into the body, it gets warmed by the lungs and it's warmer on the way out. Perhaps you are more tactile and you notice the movement of your abdomen or perhaps the rib cage, the movement of the body to create the breath. For some who practice a form of breathing called ujjayi, there's a soft sound like the ocean at the back of the throat. Ujjayi breathing is useful. The sound that it makes can help you anchor your attention in your breathing. So whatever aspect of your breathing has most of your attention, let it rest there for a few rounds of your breath. And if the body does offer a distraction and you feel like you could be more comfortable by moving in some way, make that movement with as little rustling as possible so that you can remain focused on your breathing. Now the practice, once we start, is very simple. It's a simple conscious counting practice. So when we begin your first inhale, you're going to simply count, maybe say to yourself the word 1. The following exhale is 2. The next inhale is 3, followed by 4. And we continue like that until we get to 10, and that's going to be 5 full breaths. Whereupon we loop around and start back. The next inhale is 1. So we count from 1 to 10, and we'll probably get about 2.5 to 3 rounds of full breaths. Well, it may not be as easy as it sounds. The mind has a tendency to wander. And the wandering mind may have some particular usefulness. We might even wander into that in our discussion. But for now, let's be focused on counting from 1 to 10, staying as focused as you possibly can, just on the counting of the breath. There's a little caveat here. When the mind does wander, what I'd like you to notice, make mental note of, what the reaction is to having lost focus. Smile at the reaction, smile at the fact that you lost focus, and simply return to counting the breath. If you lost count, simply start at 1. If you remember where you left off, use that. Okay, pretty easy. And we'll begin by all taking a breath together. So take a full deep breath in that fills your belly, your ribs, your chest. Hold that breath at the top for a moment. And then sigh it out. Feel the relaxing quality of the breath. And then we'll begin. This inhale is the count of 1. And this exhale is the count of 2. And I will turn it over to you now to simply count from 1 to 10. Smiling at any distraction that might arise. Focusing simply on the count of your breath. Simply allow your eyes to softly open. If you're wearing glasses, you can set them aside for a moment. Take the palms of your hands and rub them vigorously. The hands and arms are an extension of the heart center, so we're rubbing a lot of love into our palms, a lot of energy there, prana, life force, chi. And then simply cup your eyes, sealing off all of the light, and then opening your eyes into the darkness and feel for the heat of your palms on your eyes. Breathe it in, and then softly release the hands. Just with a show of hands, who was able to go all the way through the practice and not lose focus? Beautiful. Nice, Anne. So anybody who was able to do that should probably lead the rest of this discussion. If you were not able to, welcome to the human race. The mind does wander. That wandering of the mind might actually have a usefulness. So don't be too hard on yourself if the mind wanders. It does. The question then at hand might be, is it possible to control the velocity and the depth of the wandering of the mind? Yoga says that you can, and in so doing, you open the possibility of recognizing the you that lies beneath all the layers of your body, your mind, your heart, your personality, the things that you desire, the things that you don't like, all of those things that are basically distractions of the essence that you are. This is described in detail in the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali. And so I'm going to narrow the focus of the topic down into the sage Patanjali, who wrote the Yoga Sutras. So I'm going to actually read a little bit from, but before I go there, I want to mention that there are very few topics that are as open to interpretation and perhaps argument as the history and practice of yoga. So with that in mind, I'd like to approach how you listen to the discussion portion of this and notice any time that your mind reacts, maybe has a little whoop, and notice that. Just notice what comes up and simply make a mental note, I'm thinking, and simply come back to listening. And if you feel like something that is important that you want to discuss, you might make a physical note. So yoga, it has two translations in Sanskrit that might be useful for us. One is union and the other is discipline. So in the way of defining what yoga is, you might say it's the union, it's uniting all parts of our being into a whole. And it is a discipline in terms of the focusing in of the mind so that we can eliminate the distractions of the mind, clear the lens, and and to be aware of who we really are underneath all of that. So Patanjali, who was he? And this from Yoga Journal. The truth is nobody really knows much about Patanjali. We don't even know exactly when the sage lived. Some practitioners believe he lived around the 2nd century BCE and also wrote significant works on Ayurveda and Sanskrit, making him something of a Renaissance man. But based on their analysis of the language and the teachings of the sutra, modern scholars place Patanjali in the 2nd or 3rd century AD and ascribe the medical essays and grammar to various other Patanjalis. Like many tales about the world's spiritual heroes, the story of Patanjali's birth has assumed mythic dimensions. One version relates that in order to teach yoga on earth, he fell from heaven in the form of a little snake into the upturned palms, the gesture known as Anjali, of his virgin mother, Gonika, herself a powerful yogini. He's regarded as an incarnation of the 1,000-headed serpent named Remandir, or the endless Anatta, whose coils are said to support the god Vishnu. But Patanjali may have actually been several people. Anonymity was typical of the great sages of ancient India. They recognized that their teaching was the outcome of cooperative group effort that spanned several generations, and they refused to take credit for themselves, often attributing their work to some other older scholar. History of yoga, somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 years old, maybe even older. And he begins the sutra with what I would call the mission statement of yoga. So the first 3 sutras go something like this. These are translations. Now begins the practice of yoga. And I believe that he wraps the entire notion of presence into the very first word. The word is atta in Sanskrit. Now, here, present. Now begins the practice of yoga. When the mind is quiet, the lens is clear, and the light of awareness dawns. And the third sutra says, so that we might know our true nature or abide in our true nature. Through the stillness and the quieting of the mind, God can look at himself through us. So inside the Yoga Sutras, now narrowing the focal point down even further inside the Yoga Sutras, there is the 8-limbed path of yoga, the Ashtanga of yoga. In the first chapter, he outlines the first 4 layers, and then the next 4 layers he talks about in the second chapter. So just very quickly, the 8 limbs of yoga. The first is the yamas, and these are things to avoid. If you're going to be on this path to reach enlightenment, there's some things you should probably stop doing. Like lying, stealing, stop wasting your energy on things that don't serve your unfolding. And don't be greedy and attached. So these are the 5 things that one should avoid. The second limb is called the niyamas, or these are things that you should cultivate, and keeping your body, mind, and heart clean and healthy. And develop the ability to be content with what comes up. Santosha. Be grateful, live with passion, immerse yourself in your life, cultivate your spiritual awakening with sincere study, and finally, be humble and devoted to your concept of the divine. So live a devoted life. This takes us to the third limb, the limb of asana. It's the bodily postures. We've got to get the body, this is our vessel, to reach enlightenment through, in this lifetime at least. So we got to take care of the body. We do that through the asana practice, which is basically being able to sit for an extended period of time so that you can have that divine conversation. And this is pranayama. This is where we work with the breath and so we're working with the energy of the body through the pranayama. It's the regulation of our breath in a physical form and the regulation of energy through the various energy centers of our body. The 4th layer. So that takes us now into the 5th layer, or pratyahara, which is translated as sealing off the senses. So we, through practice, learn to shut out the sounds of chirping birds, the air conditioning flow, people knocking at the door. We want to seal off the senses so that we can turn inwardly. Once we've done that, it takes us to the 6th limb of the practice, and that is the focal point, if you will, for our discussion here. It is the limb known as dharana, or focus and concentration. This is where we start to narrow our focus down to a single object. Very often, what I use is just the breath, as we did in our first practice. You could be focused on a picture of divinity, or some practices focus on a particular sound, like the chant of Om, or various forms of mantra, or yantra, an image that you focus upon. Whatever it is, you cultivate the ability to focus in just on that one single point. And then that leads us naturally into a dhyana, which is the dissolution and becoming one. It's the path that he refers to as meditation. And this is when we become one with the object of our focus. And from that point, we reach the 8th limb, when we can release the object of our focus and be simply at that place of no thought, samadhi. So I'm going to, again, return to a reading because I think it puts it into better language than I possibly can. As each stage prepares us for the next, the practice of pratyahara creates the setting for dharana, or concentration. Having relieved ourselves of outside distractions, we can now deal with the distractions of the mind itself. No easy task. In the practice of concentration, this precedes meditation, we learn how to slow down the thinking process by concentrating on a single mental object. Here, our focus constantly shifts, and we fine-tune and find the nuances in our techniques, and we become self-observant. In dharana, we focus our attention on a single point. Extended periods of concentration naturally lead us into dhyana, meditation. Here, we have an uninterrupted flow of concentration, and the fine line that exists between those two stages is where dharana practices is single point, Dhyana is ultimately a state of being keenly aware without a focus. And this stage, the mind has been quieted. Stillness produces few or no thoughts at all, which leads us naturally into samadhi. In samadhi, Patanjali describes this eighth and final stage as ecstasy. In this stage, the meditator merges with his or her point of focus and transcends the self altogether. The meditator comes to realize a profound connection with the divine and interconnectedness with all things. You might say, this is the final answer to the age-old question of who am I? Einstein said, I think 99 times and I find nothing. I stop thinking, swim in silence, and the truth comes to me. So as I turn it over to you, I would say, as I think in referring in other terms to what Renee said, is if you have a question, you might try this. Take a couple of slow, deep breaths with your eyes closed and see what answer to your question comes to you from within. And then offer the question up to the group with your answer. Just an idea. And with that, I turn it back to Renee.
And I was just turning within to follow your suggestion. Thank you so much, David, for giving an excellent presentation on Patanjali as the founder of the yoga practice as we know it today, whose eight-limbed discussion of yoga includes both dharana, that focus on an individual point, and then followed by dhyana, a meditation practice that you described as going beyond that focus even, and becoming keenly aware without a focus until we finally achieve that state of oneness that the eighth stage known as samadhi. And I guess my own question would be, what do you find most helpful in daily life? And this is really a question for all of us. What do we each find most helpful in removing the distractions that is at the beginning of this path that Patanjali points to? And I'm supposed to answer my own question. I think doing my best to give my attention fully to what it is that I'm doing right now. And I found myself less and less fond of and less capable, actually, of multitasking. And I believe that aids in meditation.
Hi. I really want to thank you, David. I haven't heard that explanation in that way. And that was really complex and simple and deep. And I really appreciate it a lot. That was wonderful. Thank you. I remember for me, it's a daily meditation of practicing sitting quietly and listening to my breath and making that part of my daily practice. It's my intention to start the day that way. And I remember once I was given a mantra by one of my teachers, and I said, I have 12 daycare kids, I've got all this stuff, and how am I going to do a mantra? And he said, you can only do one thing at a time at any time, no matter what you're doing. So I'm not multitasking so well, but I'm also noticing that even if I'm doing multitasking, I can only do one thing at a time. And that's really helpful for me to remember. And I really appreciate, David, the idea of body memory and working with the body to center it with the asanas or the movement of yoga in the way that you described it, because it's very powerful. So thank you very much.
Thank you. One of the very powerful pieces of the yoga puzzle is what's called abhyasa, and it simply means to repeat. It's just like any muscle that we exercise, it gets stronger with use. very often when something draws us off focus for however long we might be gone, when we return, we often condemning ourselves for having lost focus. So Sharon Salzberg work with mindfulness practice is to be maybe congratulatory. I just discovered I lost focus. Now I'm back in the game. And it's that discovering that and constantly returning, it's like a muscle. You get better and better at returning. And I can remember in the silence, particularly in the exhale, what I was aiming at.
One thing, David, I find is that when I exhale, I feel a lot of love, expansiveness. Would you have a comment about that?
I would have never thought to cover that topic until you approached it. I'm going to ask you to reflect a little further on the answer that arises within you to that question.
Yeah, I just felt as I was doing a more awareness breathing that I just felt really, really better, not in terms of things like distractions and objects so much as like a light that was within, and it expands and felt like love. That's all I could really say.
Beautiful. What it brought up for me immediately was that the inhale is a very energizing. It's collecting, it's drawing things to us, things that we are desiring, that we're focused upon. But the exhale is this point of surrender where we're no longer attached to what we might be drawing to us, but just surrendering to the wholeness of the moment. And to me, like you, I think it's an experience of love. Just following on from last week's discussion, you know, what is love? And I think it's that feeling of inclusion in everything that's around us. And that only comes when we let go of what we're attached to. And that's the exhale.
Thank you.
Vina, I know that this is Vina Howard, I see is tuning in from Fresno, California. I know that you have a very strong meditation practice yourself. I wonder what you could share in terms of this idea of one-pointed focus.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Renee. I think that's one of the hardest things to do, I find, to have a one-pointed focus. And that is once we have that, even for we'll say 2 seconds, is the joy that one feels. It's really is what Maurice was saying, love, and it's just nothing but love, nothing but presence, nothing but joy. Even for, let's say, 5 seconds, if you can have that. You don't even have, and you want that more. But it is all, if you do 45-minute meditation, and if you can have for glimpses of that, I think we did a good job. That's what I feel. I want to have for longer times, but I'm working on it. So one-pointedness focus or dhyan is, our teacher describes it as like if you pour a big bag of beans on the ground, that will be our mind in the daily, the way it is. But then we begin to collect those or bring it to, it becomes a heap. What happens and goes upwards, the heap becomes higher and higher and higher. So and becomes finer, the all for spreading of the beans to becomes collective mountain. And then if we can imagine, even if we were able to just really, really, really push it and find it just becomes so higher and higher and higher. And really is the mind, which is, or the consciousness which is dispersed in the body, it becomes concentrated and goes upward. And what is upward is not really up and down or sideways. It's about within the purification, us with the purification of our own consciousness and concentration. And I was, I think it's it's a difficult path. They say it's like threading the needle. And with such a dispersed mind, it's very difficult. But that's the goal of the Yoga Sutra and the meditation. And then comes the samadhi after that. Then one remains in that state of concentration for I think forever, I guess. I yet to experience that. Thank you for the opportunity.
Other suggestions? Valkyrie?
Sorry. I am level beginner meditator. I started meditating at a temple, and now I notice that maybe not every time I can reach that state of complete focus on one thing. Just the mere effort of daily practice helps me. If I skip, say, 1 or 2 days, I notice that I'm not as centered as I would like to be, and it's nice to have that as a safety net when you come home and everything is so jumbled with school and work, and you're like, you just come home and you can just sit with yourself, and then you can move forward in a more focused way. And I can't say I reached that complete focus. It takes a while. But I'm practicing every day and super grateful for you guys. Thank you. That's all.
I wonder whether there are people who might want to tell us about some of the things that you choose to focus on in a meditation. David mentioned breath. He had us do an exercise focusing on counting of numbers during our breath. I'm wondering, and Diana mentioned focusing on her breath as well. There are other examples of something to focus upon.
I think a few things for me is having incense, having a smell to remind me of the environment, and also a relaxing music, some spa music or some 528 hertz background music. That helps me to kind of focus on a certain noise, or even just the fan blowing or the birds chirping, and to kind of use that as a distraction, just intently listening to that. That helps.
Thank you. Jim, do you have some suggestions for us here?
Sorry, let me get my unmute my button off. No, I don't. I can tell you an interesting true life story about concentration. After teaching a class once, a student came to me afterwards and asked if she could speak with me after class because she had a problem. And she didn't know who to discuss it with, but she felt she could trust me. So I said, well, okay, sure, fine. So she came to the office and she sat down. She says, well, I said, well, first of all, just tell me, what are you doing, at the university? And she said, well, I'm taking, I think she said 18 units. And she was a junior, and I said, 18 units. I said, that's quite a bit. And I said, what are they? So she told me that all of them were advanced calculus and chemistry. And she was also studying Russian. And she already had mastered another language. And I asked her why she was studying Russian. And she said, well, I'm going to the University of Moscow for my senior year. And I'm supposed to be proficient by that time, sufficiently to be able to attend lectures in Russian and the Russian language as well as English. I said, oh, that's quite a challenge. I said, by the way, if I might ask, how are you doing in your classes? Overall, she said, well, she kind of hesitated and said, well, I have straight A's. I said, I see. I said, how have you always done? Generally, she said, well, A's. I said, I see. Somewhere here, there's a problem. All right. So I said, well, I'm kind of wondering, why do you need to see me? What's the question? What's the problem? She says, well, I have roommates. And I'm just come to the conclusion that I'm perhaps somewhat peculiar as a person, somewhat strange. And I just wanted to see if you thought the same thing. And I thought that was a very unusual point, but go ahead. And she said, well, I noticed that my roommates, whenever they go to study, they sit up for 10 minutes and then they go sit in their bed, and the next thing I know, 20 minutes later, they're asleep. Or they study for 15 minutes and then the next thing I know, they shout something at me and they're out in the hallway chatting with friends. And I said, okay, that sounds pretty much like a dormitory. I understand that myself. And she said, well, here it is. Once I put focus my mind on something, like a text, I become so deeply involved that I can look up, and what seems to me a short period of time can be 3 hours later. I said, really? 3 hours later? She said, yes. She said, I'm not really aware, unless someone comes and touches me, I'm not really aware of time. I said, I see. She said, I've been that way ever since I was a young girl. Once I put my attention on something, particularly ideas, I enter into a different world of thought, a different state of consciousness, it seems. And I can hold it there. And I said, now when you come out of it, do you remember? She says, oh yes. She says, I do remember. But I've recognized that now that I'm rooming with people, that others don't seem to be able to do this. And that's why I'm wondering if perhaps I'm a bit peculiar or strange. And all I said to her is, well, it could well be you're a reincarnated Buddhist. I don't really know. That'd be pretentious of me to say. But nonetheless, all I can say is more power to you, and the rest of us would love to be more like you. So that was my experience with someone who had developed the power of concentration to such a high degree that she could literally consciously put herself on any topic and hold it there, because concentration has to do with the ability to sift and focus and therefore eliminate anything else. So it involves complete attention. So anyway, that was my experience with someone who I felt was an exemplar of what many Buddhist monks and perhaps others would love to be able to emulate.
Thank you, Jim. That brings to mind for me where I kind of thought the discussion might lead into some of the practical applications and our own personal experiences of the result of focus or the lack of focus and what it produced or what maybe the lack of focus disrupted. There's an expression, if you want to get something done, give it to a busy person.
Right.
People tend to be very focused at the task at hand. My sophomore year, the final semester of my sophomore year, I was taking 21 units, preparing for my leap into university. And it was the best grades. I had a 4.0, and I had time allocated out in 15-minute increments. And it was very much felt at ease at that, because everything was completely focused. for me, it was a matter of planning. It was using, actually writing down what I'd be doing for those 15-minute increments. And that was probably the most focused period of my life. And it was a very enjoyable experience. There was no stress to it at all.
It's very interesting. That's a wonderful example of just what I had encountered with a student. Do you, as a question, when you think in terms of the spiritual, and in terms of having a line of concentration, you might say a line that helps you work your way or walk your way through a labyrinth of daily life. Is this why you find in certain meditative practices, they try to teach you to have periods where you can kind of sift through and purify the mind, that is, remove images, experiences, memories, etc., that move you away from the fundamental pole star of your commitments of your life, so that what you select to focus on and encourage and nurture requires you to tend the garden of the mind, so to speak. So if you're really committed to something, some ideal, some cause, some purpose that you've formulated for yourself in life, does it require you to also periodically pause and look and sift through these other elements that you call not physical distractions, but psychological and moral distractions?
Interesting thought. What it stimulated for me was something I heard early on. Tim Galway was his name, wrote The Inner Game of Tennis, learning theorist, and he said that learning happens in the moment of interest. And that always struck me as an example. I remember seeing a phone number of my brother's new home phone number, and I was just very interested in learning it. And I remember it to this day, 50 years later, and I never had to write it down. I was just interested in it. And with the focus of interest, it simply became a part of me. It wasn't something that required repetition. It was just absorbed into me. So I think that interest, and as you mentioned, like a devotion, tends to narrow the focal field and allows a direct access. I'm not sure if that addresses your...
That's well put. Thank you. Yeah.
I recently stumbled upon Dr. Andrew Newberg. There's a reference to a body of work he's now calling neurotheology, which was a term that actually first used by Aldous Huxley in one of his books about this future. And now what they're discovering with neurobiological research is that there are states during these periods of focus, these periods of oneness, that have tremendous impact on our physiology, a very healing state of consciousness when we are able to focus in and be completely present. So it's a whole new burgeoning field where the meditative sciences and the neurobiology and our ability to track what's going on within the brain and its impact on our whole body. I think it's a fascinating field. Which brings to mind the notion of flow. Russian researcher Mihai, and then later some more research. But there's when we're in flow state and we're operating in this peak performance state, there's a level of absorption, focus. There is nothing else going on. For example, in sports, downhill skiing, you can't possibly think your way through these various turns in the moguls. It has to be purely reflexive. It has to be total absorption in the task at hand. And there are no distractions of the mind, which will simply disrupt the flow of what's going on. So for me, focus and flow state are locked together.
Here's an interesting question, if I might. It seems to me that we talk about concentration and focus as narrowing, But it depends on what the focus is about, because it is possible to put the mind's full attention on something and at the same time to be both focused, and the circle that's generated by that particular focus can be very expansive, or it can be very contracting. So that's why the emphasis on why the problem with selfishness is a selfish person can be very focused, but can that person change the focus and be other oriented, and be concerned about something that links them up with other people, such that they can be both focused and at the same time have an expansive circle that allows them to be focused and flexible. Be very aware. While they're focused on something, they're extremely aware of everything in that circle.
Yes. I think the article from Yoga Journal talked about that fine line between the single point of focus or the concentration versus meditation, when we soften the focus and then we're able to expand outward. I think that's what he was referencing in that. Neurobiologically, with focus, the prefrontal cortex, the decision-making process, can start to quiet down and soften and even wink out. And it turns out that that's the part of the brain where our sense of time is calculated. And your example of the student who lost track of time is because total absorption didn't require any sort of executive decision-making at point of focus. But also, like near the end of our typical yoga practice, when we come into Shavasana, we've completely quieted the mind, which allows this sort of expansive awareness of everyone in the room, what's going on outside the room, the full sensorium of memories and who we are all present when the mind is quiet. Bit of a conundrum, if you will. I was referencing in one of my readings that this state of samadhi is referred to by some as the peace that passeth all understanding. So if our ability to express these into words, I would say, is pretty deficient to the experience itself.
And I wanted to ask Mary, you have a very strong devotional practice as a devout Catholic, and I wonder whether you can relate some of these things that we've been talking about more from a yogic perspective to everyday experiences that you have in devotion.
My prayer time is my devotion time, and it's not always easy, and it tends to be later in the evening, and then I end up falling asleep. But I remember there's one passage where they said, where can you find the Lord? He's not in the thunder, he's not in the lightning, he's not in the rain, he's in the quiet. So by quieting my mind, finding some place that I can just tune everything out, that's my devotional time. I don't meditate so much. I just quiet myself so that I can listen for the Lord to let me know what he wants me to do. And it doesn't come as a voice, it might just come as a thought. So that's how I view my meditation time. And it's wonderful. It's, and I don't worry that I don't get it all the time. Some days might go by and I go, oh, I didn't have time. I didn't even have 5 minutes to share with the Lord. But, he understands what we're all going through, and we're all going through different things. And he just is happy when we're able to spend a little time with him, say hello, say thank you for all the wonderful blessings we have received, and it's all good. Amen.
That's wonderful.
Sharon, do you want to try again?
Okay. I have like a monkey mind, so my mind bounces from wall to wall. So to do this silent period of being meditation, like I do a lot of yoga, to be at that spot is very fast and is very small. But when I do, like when people say, oh, you know, all the noise around us bother us, I'm like, why? We're supposed to be inside of ourselves to be when we're doing yoga. But recently I was doing this class in on Homer's Odyssey, and I asked my friend from Greece about it, and people were like discussing about the whole thing, and they thought that his end was to get, why wasn't he going to get to where Penelope was, and that's his goal. And he took 10 years of these journeys, and he did, you know, and that was the whole thing about the Odyssey. And so I asked my Greek friend what he thought about this Homer's Odyssey, and he says, you know, I think the whole point is journey of life is maybe more important than the destination. And sometimes we think our destination that's all we focus, that we lose, and we miss out on all the opportunities that's happening around us at that moment, because we're so focused into working towards our destination. And then the other thing he says, and then that mortals make plans that fate laughs. So no matter how many things we try to do to reach this destination, fate laughs at us mortals. So it's sort of opposite of trying to always be focused only, because we miss out on everything that's around us.
Very interesting.
It actually reminds me of what it is that helps me, is to be completely present with what I'm doing at any given time, to the exclusion, pretty much, of anything else that may be trying to interrupt. And maybe I'm only on one step of the journey, but that's the only step that's real for the moment for me.
But also what I think what she's pointing to is the fact that you can be concentrated in following a line, but you can also let go of that, go do something else and go back and pick up the line. So that's the person who's really high in concentration. They can let go of something in order to shift focus and enjoy something and return to the line.
Perfect.
I heard an interesting discussion once about the whether we can truly multitask or not. And processors, using the computer analogy, do process only one bit of information at a time, but they do it very rapidly, and the switching back and forth. But the author was in defense of multitasking, having to do with being able to bring multiple disciplines and finding through these various focal points, finding a common point to create perhaps a new perspective. And we're seeing this as from various fields come together, and we can analyze them from different points of view to create a new possibility. So I think that's in defense of multitasking. And also, you know, I mentioned this early on, the mind does have a tendency to wander, or maybe it's the ability to wander. And this may be of some benefit to our evolutionary process. And I wonder if anybody had thought about what the wandering mind might be a benefit to us.
So let's set that as a wondering. Let ourselves wander a bit and see where we might go. And I'd like to thank you so sincerely for giving us such a great platform to jump off of into this topic of meditation, which is sometimes a little daunting for anybody who's tried to sit still for very long and say, I'm going to meditate. And just having the opportunity to count breaths going in and out, that didn't seem so daunting. And so I appreciate it from the simplicity and to the depths that you provided for us very much. So we have a lot to look forward to and so much to be thankful for. Thank you ever so much, David, for all of you who were in attendance, all of you who shared your manal with us. Very grateful.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you, Renee.
Oh,
Thank you, David.
Thanks, David.
Thank you all.